What I'd like to talk about at the moment is a little bit about why the development, but why an introduction of these missiles into Germany by the United States would would certainly create a trigger point for a potential third world war. And the reasons for this are actually quite simple. The warning times available to both sides, both the Russians and the Europeans and the United States, would be very short. And because of these short warning times and the enormous destructive capability of the weapons involved, the result would be a hair trigger situation all the time. And both sides, I'll focus on the Russian side for this discussion because it has an important implications for German security. Both sides will seek, because they will feel they have no other choice, to destroy the other's nuclear forces if they perceive something is about to happen. And this will almost, certainly lead to a rapid, uncontrolled escalation that would involve the strategic forces of both the United States and Russia. So it's simply a matter of proximity, the perceived danger that each side will have of the other, and the inability to, in any kind of controlled way, to use nuclear weapons to reach, to protect themselves. But there will certainly be a situation that will be unstoppable should it get going. Now, I have a few slides. I will try to jump through them since I won't. I know that this will. I can't. Oh, incidentally, I can make the slides available to any of the audience if Helga is willing to distribute them. That would be very nice. And so basically, what I'm concerned about, what I'm describing in this talk, is the U.S. deployment into Germany of these mobile nuclear armed missiles. Now, people are right now, what people are saying is they're not nuclear armed. That's basically ridiculous. They will be nuclear armed. They have to be nuclear armed because if they're not nuclear armed, they have no meaning of any kind. I want to be clear. The numbers of these missiles and with conventional warheads cannot possibly make any kind of significant difference with regard to the military balance. There are just much too few of them, and their capabilities are much too small. So these weapons will be very quickly turned into nuclear weapons. And unfortunately, my country, as Ambassador Matlock has also said, cannot be basically trusted to not suddenly change the rules of engagement. And there's no way, in my judgment, that these missiles will not be nuclear if they are deployed. So that's something very important to keep in mind. If you look a little bit at what these particular missiles are, they're going to be in trucks where that will carry canisters that can be turned vertical through the roof of the truck and launch. Now, an important thing about these trucks is that when they are on the road, they will be extremely difficult to distinguish from commercial trucks that are carrying, you know, civil commercial goods.
Hmm.
That's not an accident. They're intended to be very difficult to determine whether or not they are civil units, because one of the ways to hide these trucks is to simply make them look like commercial trucks. This means that the Russians, if they began to become concerned that these trucks were setting up in different locations, the locations would be kept secret as best they could, but the Russians would know some of them for sure. Uh, as long as the Russians see this happening and they choose to try to deal with this, what they are likely to do, almost certainly, will be to try to destroy these units before they are used to attack Russia. So this means there could be a very wide use of nuclear weapons uh, on uh, on German soil. Now, the thing about these particular missiles that they're carrying is I don't know if you can see my cursor. Can you? No,
Um,
I guess not.
no.
Okay, if you look at this left yellow box here
Mhm.
at the top,
Yes, now we can see your cursor. Go
you
ahead.
can see the cursor. Okay, so I'm putting the cursor over what is called the hypersonic vehicle. It's basically very similar in many ways to a ballistic missile warhead, except it's designed to have some aerodynamic lift on it, which ballistic missile warheads are not really designed for that because they're most of the time they spend outside the atmosphere. So uh, if you had a ballistic missile warhead, you would launch it on a lofted trajectory, and the lofted trajectory would, with the curvature of the Earth, it would quickly be seen, even though the curvature of the Earth is large enough to mask the launch from a radar, let's say in Moscow. uh, you would at least have maybe 10 or 12 minutes of observation of this object coming at you. However, if you have a hypersonic vehicle, it is launched to a speed that's about the same as that of the ballistic missile. So it actually takes a somewhat shorter time to get to Moscow because it's traveling on a shorter path. It's skimming off the top of the atmosphere, but its speed is extremely high. And because it is low to the ground, it is only likely to be in the line of sight of radars in Moscow, maybe 3 minutes or so before it's actually going to arrive. So the Russians would have almost no warning of a nuclear attack on their leadership. So this will cause the Russians to put in place mechanisms to rapidly react. I cannot tell you what those mechanisms would be, but they are certainly going to include various kinds of what we call pre-delegated authority, authority to take action if, for example, a communication from Moscow all of a sudden disappears. And if you had an accidental communication blackout under certain crisis conditions, that could lead to the massive use of nuclear weapons against Germany. So I won't go through this because this was really the fear of the United States during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. In 1962, the United States uh, produced a blockade of Cuba in order and was planning to invade if the Russians did not back down to to stop the nuclear weapons deployments in Cuba, because the warning times would be so small and unacceptable for the United States if nuclear ballistic missiles were launched from Cuba. Now, uh, fortunately, uh, Khrushchev had been through a war himself, and he understood, as had incidentally John Kennedy had been through a war. And both of these experienced presidents, both of whom had been soldiers, understood how quickly things could get out of control. Now, just imagine what might have happened if Khrushchev told Kennedy, well, Cuba's none of your business. You have no right to tell us not to put nuclear weapons in Cuba. World War III could have happened at that point because the United States would have certainly invaded. And we know now that there were already nuclear-armed ballistic missiles in Cuba. And we don't know what would have happened, but it's a significant chance that those weapons would have or could have been launched. Now, in December 2021, Sergei Lavrov was talking to Antony Blinken, and Blinken told him that the United States reserved the right to put nuclear-armed ballistic missiles in Ukraine. And Lavrov objected. Lavrov said, we would object to that. And Blinken's statement to Lavrov was, you have no business telling the Ukrainians what they can and cannot do. It's not your business. Well, imagine if Khrushchev had done that to the American president, and to think that and of course this was December 2021, and the invasion occurred on February 24, 2022, only a couple of months later. Not a surprise if you know a little bit about the situation that people would be contemplating from a military and political point of view. So what could a Russian tactical nuclear attack on these missile deployments in Germany look like? Well, we don't know, but we do know the practices that a military institution will take. It's not because they're crazy. It's because they're trying every way they possibly know to limit damage to their own country. And they know when they're doing this that the probable outcome is the destruction of the world. Anybody who thinks these soldiers don't know what they're doing and don't understand the full consequences of what they're involved in just doesn't know them. I worked shoulder to shoulder with Americans who did this, soldiers, and they knew exactly what they were facing. And they would have done their jobs, but they would not have done them with any sense at all that the world was going to be, the same place, or they would even be alive, or their families would be alive. So the idea that these soldiers are somehow don't understand the consequences is wrong. My experience is the civilian leadership at the Pentagon are the ones who don't fully understand the consequences. So here is, for an example, it's a notional idea. I have little nuclear explosions I've shown, and these red oval areas show you areas where the fallout, radioactive materials from the nuclear explosions would fall to the ground and produce a radiation field that's large enough that if people did not evacuate this area within 24 hours, they would receive a lethal dose. The blue area shows you the region where people would get enough radiation that they would be sick, and a good number of them could actually die because they wouldn't have medical support. Now, this is only for, let's say, a dozen or so nuclear detonations. I'm assuming, incidentally, a nuclear yield of the warheads, exactly what Putin said the nuclear yields of Russian tactical nuclear warheads would be, 75 kilotons. That's what I have assumed. They could be larger, they could be smaller. My guess is there'll be a mix. These attacks would be at sites where the Russians believe there might be a unit of U.S. tactical ballistic missiles set up. In fact, there would be many more uncertain sites, and there would be many more, probably there would be hundreds of these weapons launched, because the intelligence is uncertain, and missing a site where multiple nuclear weapons could be launched against your country, including your capital, is not an outcome you want to face as a possibility. So given that weapons are already being used, you are not going to say, gee, one more weapon could be escalation. You're going to go after everything you think could possibly be a target, be a threat to your country. Now, here is a threat area that could also be targeted. This is a map of Hamburg in 1943. It shows that it demarks areas that were uh, bombed in the bombing attacks of July 27 and 28 on 1943. And this area here shows the area of Hamburg, which incidentally is a big command center. So this is going to be hit too. You're not going to say we're not going to hit a command center. That's where all the decisions are being made to release these weapons against you. You're going to go after all, and there will be, of course, many cities, probably most, that will be hit with a nuclear weapon. This area burnt down in what's called a firestorm. Now, here's just a photograph of a burning area, but a firestorm occurs when you have a very large area on fire. The size of the area matters because as it gets bigger, the intensity of the heating over the area over which air is heated gets larger by the area, whereas the perimeter only gets larger linearly. So the intensity of the air sweeping in from the outside is not enough to cooling effect to prevent the air temperatures to get enormously high in the fire area. And what you get very quickly is a circulating firestorm. And these firestorms, here's an image from an air attack. This is a firestorm developing, but I won't go through this for now. But what happens is the circular area of fire naturally develops air motion that drives the fire inward, resulting in the whole area coming into flames and very high winds on the ground. So the temperatures are enormous, enough to melt glass at the centers of the firestorm. The air temperature is above the boiling point of water. The wind speeds are at hurricane force, and people, even in shelters, they get trapped because they can't go out of the shelter. There's nowhere the air is so hot and the winds are so high, and they literally get roasted in the shelters. And this is what we saw in Hamburg, Dresden, and other German cities that were firebombed during World War II. So if you want to get a sense of what the area of Hamburg would suffer a firestorm relative to what happened in 1943, I've now projected that area over a Google satellite map so you can get a sense of the structure of the city below rather than from a map. And this is the area that a 75 kiloton, a small tactical nuclear weapon, would set on fire. The fire area on the ground would be much more intense than what occurred in the firestorm area, which was much smaller during the 1943 horrifying attack. Now, it's important to keep in mind that there's also radiation generated by this nuclear weapon, and the radiation gets mostly carried to a high altitude, and it falls out in the form of particles within tens of minutes of the detonation cloud forming. And this area shows you it's close in. It shows you the area downwind, so there's an assumption of wind direction here. You wouldn't know it at the time of the attack. And it shows you the area where people would die from fallout exposure within an hour because the radiation intensity would be so high and it would be arriving so soon. Now, again, Hamburg is a big metropolitan area, and it has a commercial airport. Now, why would you attack a commercial airport? It's not a military installation. Well, if you're in a war and a war is a possibility, you could very likely disperse many of your military aircraft to commercial airports to minimize the chances that they will be destroyed if the military airport is attacked. So this means the commercial airports will also be attacked. I'm just trying to give you a sense of the reasoning behind this kind of attack. So in this case, you would have a second. Again, I'm assuming arbitrarily that it's another tactical nuclear weapon of 75 kilotons. Could well, in fact, I think it would be likely bigger. And this area in between these two fire areas, there would be winds set up from the two uh, wind motions drawing air in and competing with each other that would cause this entire area to merge into a giant firestorm. So this is the kind of levels of damage that you can it's unimaginable. As you can probably tell, I went to a lot of trouble here to put together graphics that are real as best we can do for a human being. So here, I've added to this graphic, which just shows the burnt out area, the burning area of Hamburg. I've added Nagasaki before on a scale that's comparable. So the street scales are comparable to the area that burned out. So this is a smaller area I'm showing you here. And so if you want to get a feel for the levels of damage that occurred from the nuclear attack on Nagasaki, here is Nagasaki. That's one of the two photographs above, before the attack. And here it is after the attack. And in this case, there was a lot of blast, and the place was essentially cleared of all buildings and basically, essentially, most of the life. So I'm going to end here. I can talk more about fallout, but I think my point here, to be transparent and blunt, is to scare you with the truth. I'm open about this with people when I talk about these kinds of issues. I don't want to overstate the situation. In fact, I'm understating it. I want people to understand that we are looking into the abyss of the end of human civilization as we know it, and possibly the end of human life on the planet as we know it. And I'm trying to be as candid as I can be with these graphics, not exaggerating them, but just to give you a sense of what could occur. And this is why I totally agree with every point that Ambassador Matlock said earlier.